She was invisible to them, just the cleaning lady who swept their marble floors and vanished before dinner. They never knew her name, never saw the strength behind her tired smile. So, when the millionaire sent her an invitation as a joke, the guests laughed. A black woman, at his grand gala? It was supposed to be entertainment, something to whisper about over champagne. But that night, something shifted. The laughter would fade, the whispers would stop, and every eye in that glittering room would turn to her. Because she didn't come to serve, she came to be seen. And when she walked in, no one could ever forget. For years, Marjorie Daniels had lived in the quiet shadows of wealth she could never touch. Every morning before sunrise, she arrived at the Whitmore estate, a mansion so vast it looked more like a museum than a home. She moved through its golden halls softly, polishing silver that would never touch her table, arranging flowers that would never sit in her living room. To the family, she was part of the background, dependable, unseen, and replaceable. But Marjorie didn't complain.
She needed the job.
The paycheck kept her grandchildren fed, her tiny apartment warm, her pride intact. Even when the Whitmores forgot her name at Christmas or spoke around her as if she wasn't there, she smiled politely and kept working. Because that's what survival looked like, quiet dignity in a world that rarely looked back. Then came the invitation. A thick white envelope, slipped into her cleaning cart by one of the guests during a charity event. The words were elegant, the handwriting sharp. You're invited to the annual Whitmore Gala. Dress your best. She thought it was a mistake at first, maybe even kindness. But the smirks she caught that day told a different story. Still, something inside her, something that had been quiet for too long, told her to go. Maybe to prove she could. Maybe because she was tired of being invisible. That night, as she stood before the mirror in the only gown she could afford, Marjorie didn't see a cleaner. She saw a woman who had endured enough to deserve her place anywhere. She didn't yet know that walking through those grand doors would expose more than prejudice. It would expose truth. And it would change how everyone saw her forever. When Marjorie arrived at the Whitmore mansion that evening, the air shimmered with wealth. Luxury cars lined the marble driveway, and golden lights spilled from the ballroom windows. She hesitated at the gates, clutching her thrift store clutch, her second-hand gown brushing the gravel. For a moment, she thought of turning back. But then she straightened her shoulders and walked in. The moment she stepped through the doors, conversations faltered. Eyes shifted. Laughter dimmed to a curious hush. The pianist's melody carried on, but the mood had changed. Guests stared at her as if she'd wandered into the wrong story, like an extra who'd mistaken herself for the star. "Who let her in?" someone whispered, their voice cutting through the music. Another chuckled quietly, clinking his glass. Marjorie pretended not to hear. She had survived harsher words in quieter rooms. She found a place near the back, standing beneath the chandelier's glittering light. Her hands trembled slightly, so she clasped them tight. Around her, the room buzzed with the kind of confidence that money breeds, careless, easy, inherited. And in the center of it all stood him, Charles Whitmore, the man who owned the estate, the company, and in some ways her livelihood. He spotted her almost instantly. A smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. The guests followed his gaze, like a signal had been given. It was clear now, this wasn't an act of kindness. It was entertainment. A cruel little joke meant to remind her of her place. But what they didn't know was that Marjorie had come prepared. She wasn't the timid housekeeper they remembered from the morning. Her niece, a makeup artist, had transformed her with quiet love and defiance, soft curls, crimson lips, and a gown that, though simple, made her glow. She didn't blend into the background tonight. She stood out. As Charles raised his glass for a toast, his words carried a sharpened edge. To unexpected guests, proof that anyone can dress up for the night. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She smiled instead, a small, calm curve that silenced a few chuckles. Something about her composure unsettled them. When the orchestra began to play again, Marjorie walked toward the center of the ballroom. Her steps were slow, deliberate, echoing softly across the polished floor. She didn't need an invitation. She had already earned her place here through years of unseen labor. Each stride was a quiet rebellion. Conversations faltered again. Some looked away. Others whispered nervously. And then, without warning, the host's wife, a woman who had never once learned Marjorie's name, approached her, smiling with false warmth. "Oh my, how lovely of you to come," she said, her words dripping with sugar and steel. Marjorie met her gaze and replied, steady and sure, "Thank you for having me. I've been part of this home for years. It's nice to finally be seen in it." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the music seemed to pause. Charles's smirk faded. The laughter that once echoed through the hall had turned to discomfort. And as Marjorie turned to walk toward the balcony, her head high, everyone's eyes followed her. Not with amusement this time, but with something far more complicated. The night had only begun. And before it was over, the same people who mocked her would have to face the truth about the woman they tried to humiliate. The night had turned heavy, thick with tension, pride, and something unspoken that hung in the air like smoke. Marjorie stood on the balcony, her back straight, her heart beating so hard it felt like thunder in her chest. Behind her, she could hear them gathering, the laughter replaced by whispers, the kind that cut deeper than words. Charles Whitmore followed, his voice dripping with false amusement. "Well, this is quite the sight," he said loudly, enough for others to hear. "The help playing Cinderella. Did you really think you belonged here, Marjorie?" The words hit her like ice. For a moment, every instinct told her to look down, to apologize, to disappear back into the quiet corners where she had always been safe. But then, she remembered her daughter, her late husband, her reflection in the mirror that evening. She remembered how it felt to finally see herself as enough. She turned around slowly. The crowd stood behind him now, a sea of polished shoes and judgmental eyes. "You're right," she said softly. "I don't belong here. Not in a room where kindness is a costume." A few gasps echoed. Cameras, phones, lenses began to lift. Someone whispered her name. Marjorie stepped closer, her voice steady now. "You invited me to humiliate me. But you forgot one thing. I've spent my life cleaning up after people who thought they were better than me. And tonight I'm done." Her words sliced through the music like lightning. Every head turned. Charles's smug expression faltered, his confidence unraveling. For the first time, it wasn't Marjorie who looked out of place, it was him. She placed her small purse on the table beside her, then slipped off her gloves, deliberate, calm, powerful. "I may be your cleaning lady," she said, "but I carry something you'll never own, dignity." The room fell completely silent. No music, no laughter, just the truth echoing off marble walls. Marjorie looked around one last time, her chin lifted high. "You wanted a show," she said quietly. "Well, here it is." Then she walked away, past the stunned crowd, past the man who'd tried to make her small. And as the doors closed behind her, no one could move. Because for the first time, they were the ones left speechless. Marjorie never returned to the Whitmore estate after that night. She didn't have to. The story spread faster than anyone expected, first among the staff, then through whispers in the town, and finally across social media when one of the guests posted the video. Millions watched the clip of a black woman standing tall in a sea of privilege, refusing to bow. Some called her brave. Others called her ungrateful. But she didn't care about either. For the first time, she felt seen. The Whitmores issued a statement days later. Apologies wrapped in polished words, promises of diversity training, and community outreach. But Marjorie knew what that really meant. They were sorry they'd been caught. The real change wouldn't come from them. It would come from people who saw her and understood her silence, her strength, her pain. She went back to her small apartment, the same one filled with framed photos and secondhand furniture. But it felt different now. She carried herself differently. Her story had become something larger than humiliation. It had become proof. Proof that dignity doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from knowing your worth when the world tries to deny it. Weeks later, a local journalist interviewed her, asking what she felt that night, when the laughter stopped, when the room went silent. She paused for a long time before answering. I felt free, she said, because for once, they had to see me as more than the help. They had to see me as human. Her words lingered like a quiet storm, uncomfortable, honest, necessary. And maybe that's the point of stories like hers. They remind us that racism doesn't always come in shouts. It often hides in smiles, jokes, and invitations meant to wound. Marjorie's story isn't just hers. It's a reflection of countless others who walk into rooms where they're not expected to belong and choose to stay anyway. Because every time someone like her refuses to shrink, the world is forced to look in the mirror and ask itself, when will we finally stop needing moments like this to remember our shared humanity?